Hi guys, welcome back, or welcome to Switch to Life, and today we're going to be reviewing Illuminations' latest movie, as it just recently dropped on Peacock, that of course being Migration. Now I gotta say that I really enjoyed this movie. Of course, I didn't love it, I only liked it, but honestly, this movie was super funny and definitely a nice family road trip style movie starring ducks. And yeah, that's pretty much the gist of this movie. Now, I gotta say that Illumination have really stepped up their game in their animation department, because this happens to be some of the best animation we've seen from them. Not as good as the Mario movie, but still really great. I also want to point out that they make funny facial expressions throughout the entire movie, and it's both weird, but at the same time, super funny. And I just gotta say that I loved it when the characters were making impossible faces. Now, let's move on. The music, it's nice, but at the same time, it didn't really stand out when compared to other movies. And also, there's the voice acting, which I gotta say they chose some really great voice actors, but I have to admit that some of them didn't really do a good job in portraying their characters. The emotions just didn't shine through. Thankfully, plenty of actors actually did portray their characters with emotion, especially when it came to Gwen, Keegan-Michael Key, and even Danny DeVito did a good job with Uncle Dan. And I gotta say, when it came to this story, I really enjoyed it. Overall, this movie was funny, had great quality animation, and is definitely worth watching if you want to have a family road trip style movie starring ducks. So, time to dive into the story. And it starts with a bedtime story told by Mac to the Mallard children, where he explains that you should never ever leave the safety of the pond, because if you do, you will die. And it's that simple. Now, I really enjoyed this scene because it shows how protective of a father that Mac is, but unfortunately, it also shows how overprotective he is. And, of course, the movie progresses to show a flock of ducks coming down to the pond on their way to migrating to Jamaica, and that plants an idea in the Mallard's head that they should go to Jamaica as well, except for Mac, who is afraid to leave the safety of the pond, and he doesn't want to put his children in harm's way. And then Uncle Dan shows up out of nowhere, and he has a conversation with Mac where he explains that if he doesn't change his ways, then he will end up just like him.
Happy! Yeah! Healthy! Yeah! And totally alone! Yeah! Wait, what?
So Mac gathers up the courage to get his family to actually go on a migration to Jamaica, at which point they end up lost and they meet a heron who is notorious for eating ducks, but fortunately, this turns out to just be a kind heron who wants to protect the family from the other night predators. And unfortunately, there's a bit of a problem here because the Mallards, it's kind of a horror scene, and it's really awesome. I loved watching that unfold.
Looks like your last guest is still here. And dead!
But unfortunately, the Mallards end up being lost, and they end up in the big city where they discover a flock of pigeons led by Chump, at which point they ask Chump for directions to Jamaica, and she doesn't know how to get to Jamaica, but she knows a guy from Jamaica, which leads to the Mallards meeting Delroy, who is a parakeet who is locked in a cage due to the chef. Now, one thing that I really want to mention, the chef is a really good villain, but above all else, I think what really makes this movie awesome is the fact that in this movie, the humans don't talk at all. And that's actually really good, because if we go back to the Illumination Cinematic Universe theory, I left a link down below in the description, but the gist of it is that all of the Illumination movies and short films exist on a single timeline, including Migration. And that's really good because in The Secret Life of Pets, we learned that there's actually two different kinds of languages when it comes to animals: domesticated and wild. Obviously, domesticated animals can understand the human language, but they have trouble speaking the wild language. Wild animals have trouble understanding humans, so I really think it's cool that the humans in this movie don't talk, since we're dealing with a family of ducks, who are wild animals, not domesticated animals. Anyway, back to the plot. So it turns out that Delroy's key is actually kept on the chef, so Mac, mustering up some bravery despite knowing the danger, ends up sneaking into the chef's kitchen alongside Pam, where they grab the key and manage to escape back to Delroy's cage, at which point, despite the chef's persistence, they manage to free Delroy, and Delroy ends up leading them all the way to Jamaica, but unfortunately, Gwen has to take a potty break, and when she does, the mallards end up discovering a sort of reserve where ducks are pampered and fed and fattened, and obviously you know where this is going. It turns out that what looks like paradise is actually just a fattening spa for the ducks so that they can be given to restaurant owners around the world where they will be killed and fed to humans. And so that's when the chef returns and tries to collect all the ducks on the farm. And of course, the mallards know who the chef is, so they try to warn the other ducks, which causes a mass panic. And in the process of escaping the chef, Dak actually ends up getting his feathers ripped off because he tries to be a hero, at which point he gets yelled at by his father, who says that he wanted him to avoid the danger. So Dak, feeling kind of sad, leaves the flock, at which point Gwen decides to go out and comfort him. But then the chef shows up and kidnaps all of the other ducks in the flock and makes it so that he flies away in his helicopter, which I gotta say, this chef is really persistent. I mean, obviously, you can't let a bunch of ducks fly away or there's a loss to your restaurant, but this guy literally grabbed his helicopter and chased these ducks down, and that's actually very persistent and determined and really shows how evil this guy is. So, obviously, Dak and Gwen try to go rescue their parents, but they can't due to the fact that since Dak's wings were injured earlier, he can't actually fly. And that's when he comes up with the ingenious idea to use Delroy's parrot feathers to create brand new wings for himself. Meanwhile, Pam and Mac are locked inside of a cage separate from the rest of the flock, simply due to the fact that they were the ones who broke into his kitchen earlier. Thankfully, they managed to find a way to tango their way across the plain to the cage where the rest of the flock is being held, but unfortunately, they're caught at the last second, and they would have died right then and there if it weren't for the fact that Uncle Dan and Delroy teamed up to launch a bunch of produce at the chef. And when that happened, the hangar doors open, causing the chef and Pam and Mac to fall outside of the helicopter. And while the chef is caught in the net, Pam and Mac aren't so lucky, and since they can't fly while inside the cage, they're going to die until Dak and Gwen show up at the last second, manage to open the cage and save their parents, at which point they all kind of have a hug despite falling in the sky, and then they start flapping their wings up to the helicopter to rescue the rest of the flock, except the rest of the flock manage to escape their own cage due to sheer force, at which point the flock flies off to Jamaica. Now, personal hot take, I think that Gwen should have pooed on the chef's face because, well, the way I see it, it kind of would have been good for her character. In the movie, Gwen is shy of peeing in the sky. She wants privacy. But then there's also the fact that birds do actually go to the bathroom in the sky. And I feel like if Gwen's first time doing it was like to punish the main villain, it would have been really satisfying. But oh well. So the flock flies off to Jamaica, at which point Delroy realizes that they're lost, and then Mac actually discovers that the water is glowing, which is actually a thing that happens in Jamaica, and thus they manage to actually find the island, and then they spend the entire winter months partying alongside all of the other migration birds, including Dak's new girlfriend, And then when winter is over and spring comes, the mallards actually don't go north. Instead, they go further south to help a bunch of penguins find their way back home to Antarctica, which actually really shows Mac's character development. At the start of the movie, he doesn't want to leave the pond for any reason. Now he's practically trying to get his family gathered together so they can go on a brand new adventure because he had so much fun on the previous adventure despite all the dangers that they faced. And with that, the movie actually ends, leaving on a tiny bit of a cliffhanger that could possibly set up a future sequel, but at the same time, it's kind of one of those endings that's okay to leave off of if they want to keep this thing a solo movie, which, considering the box office return, or rather a lack thereof, I think they might actually not make a sequel to this movie. But who knows? Maybe Illumination is currently in the early stages of Migration 2, and that wouldn't surprise me considering the fact that they're turning The Secret Life of Pets and Sing into trilogies, and they're also continuing the Despicable Me franchise yet again. Speaking of, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and overall I thought that Migration was a really enjoyable and definitely funny movie, especially if you want a film about family. But at the end of the day, what did you guys think of it? Make sure to like and leave your comments down below, and be sure to subscribe so you can keep up to date on all things DreamWorks, as this is a mostly DreamWorks focused channel. However, I also plan to do a review for the entire Despicable Me franchise leading up to the release of Illumination's next movie, Despicable Me 4. And with that in mind, I hope you are all staying safe out there, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye bye.
Whoa, that did it.